Now that we've looked at the context, the background, and assumptions of Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory, it's time for us to look at the 5 systems that compose the theory. The theory begins with the child in the center, and then the concentric systems that are the most approximate to the child, the closest to the child, and then moving out to more distant from the child. However, we shouldn't assume that because a system is more distant from a child, that it's less important. As I've emphasized all along, Bronfenbrenner's theory really promotes the idea that all of these systems are incredibly and critically important to the healthy development of a child. We're going to begin with those that are closest to the child. And the first one is the microsystem. The microsystem is the immediate environment of the child. I find it helpful to think of it as any person or entity with which or whom the child has direct contact. So this could include things like the child's family, parents, siblings, their friends, their teachers, their neighborhood or neighbors with whom they have direct contact. That's in the microsystem. The next system is the mesosystem. And remember how I said that this theory is relational. This is a great example of that. There are not people or entities that are specifically in the mesosystem. Rather, it's the relationships between people and entities within the microsystem. For example, the child's parent and teacher is in the microsystem. And if the child's parent and teacher have a relationship with each other, a good one, where they're communicating about the child's homework and things, that relationship is in the mesosystem. Or if it's a bad one, that relationship's in the mesosystem. It could also include things like the relationship between the child's siblings, or if there's a relationship that's contentious or very close and positive between the child's brother and mother, their child's friends and their parents. Any of the relationships between and among people in the microsystem are the mesosystem. Next, we have the exosystem. The exosystem are things that indirectly influence the child. So, compared to this, we see this is the immediate environment with whom the child has direct contact. There's not direct contact with the child, but certainly there's a strong indirect influence. It could include things like the parent's work environment. The child may never go to the parent's work. They might not know the parent's boss. But if this work environment will allow the parent to take time off when the child is sick, if they have adequate health care coverage, if they are paying a living wage or not, all of these things very powerfully but indirectly influence the child's well-being and development. The next system is the macrosystem. And the macrosystem is the broader, the larger cultural context. It includes things like if it's predominantly a Western or Eastern culture, if there are subcultures that the child is part of or that are interacting with the dominant culture. More specifically, it includes attitudes. Attitudes towards things like race, sex, sexual orientation, gender, all of those kinds of things. Those attitudes are in the macrosystem, and they certainly influence children a lot. Another thing that's in here are political attitudes that are in the macrosystem, and values are also part of the macrosystem. Finally, there's a chronosystem, and the chronosystem is all about time and timing. There are 2 ways that the chronosystem can influence the child. One is the timing of particular things on a child's development. For example, if parents get divorced when a child is 6, that would be different kind of influence than if they get divorced when the child is 26. It could also mean events that happen in society, such as the Great Depression or 9/11 or a war. Those kinds of things, the timing of them influence the child differently. The second way that time influences the child from the Chronos system is patterns and accumulation of things over time. So, for example, if a child is of a minority race and that child is maybe bullied as a child or shunned as an adolescent, maybe they're discriminated against in worker housing as an adult, the accumulation of those aggressions impact the development of the child. Similarly, public policies and programs, the impact of them over time could influence the development of a child for better or for worse. So all of that timing, both the timing of a particular event or the accumulation of things over time, are in the Chronos system. I want to point out one more thing while we're talking about the systems. Remember that one unusual thing, a unique thing about this theory, is that it's relational and not individual. And so what goes into what system is not about the title of the individual or entity, but it's about how the individual or entity relates to the child. For example, in the microsystem, we could have a social worker. If the social worker does home visits, comes, sits down with the child, talks to the child, might do some therapy with the family, that's in the immediate environment and the child has direct contact. The social worker could also be in the mesosystem. If the social worker has a relationship with the child's parent, that social worker-parent relationship is in the mesosystem. We could also have a social worker in the exosystem. This would be one that doesn't directly interact with the child or doesn't have a relationship with the parent. But let's say that there's a social worker on the county board who votes and makes decisions about what kinds of programs are available or not available to help and support this child within her or his family environment. That social worker is in the exosystem. So we can see that we can't necessarily say social workers go in this system. It really depends on what is the social worker's relationship to the child. And that's true for any individuals or entities within this very relational theory. So now that we know the 5 systems of ecological theory, we're going to look at a specific example on how we can apply the theory to a child's development within the context of the family.